Injuries are inevitable in combat sports. Even if you're not competing, you're gonna get small tweaks in your body here and there. But just because you're injured doesn't mean you stop training. In this video, I'm gonna teach you how to train if you're injured, and just some rules of thumb I personally follow when I'm training with an injury. So first thing is just to work on something else. For example, I've broken my foot in Muay Thai twice. One time I kicked someone's knee during sparring, and the other one it was my first time fighting in a smoker, and I kicked a guy in the head, but I landed with my toes and then my foot broke. But a lot of people would stop training after hurting their foot. But there's still a lot of stuff you can do. For example, this would be a great time to work on your upper body strength, because you don't need to be standing up for that. Also, having good upper body strength is a strong asset to have in combat sports. Also, you can still work out your legs with certain exercises with things like Nordic hamstring curls. Also, with your core, you could still work out that. But when my foot started to feel a little bit better, obviously I couldn't go straight back into Muay Thai or wrestling, but I was able to focus on my boxing for a few weeks, since that didn't really hurt my foot too bad. And I was able to do everything when it came to boxing and just using my hands. I just made sure I wore my wrestling shoes so my foot had some extra stability. And this goes into my second point of just to modify your training. So obviously with a messed up foot, I wasn't able to do Muay Thai, but I was still able to box. But another example is when I was training with a fractured rib. It even hurt slightly to breathe, so it hurt like hell when I was punching a heavy bag. So since this was the case, I just did shadow boxing for a few days. But even doing that was tough, so when I shadow boxed, it was more technical shadow boxing, the way you see a lot of the Japanese fighters do, rather than harder shadow boxing where you're actually visualizing your opponent and going fast. But eventually I was able to hit the bag without pain. But when I sparred, I would just spar with a body protector on. That way my ribs wouldn't get any worse. Now there are some things you can't train with. For example, when you have a concussion, you're not supposed to be doing anything. Same thing when you're sick, you shouldn't really be doing anything that's going to aggravate your central nervous system. But there's still many ways to get better at your sport. For example, meditation is one thing. Fighting's a very cognitive and strategic sport. So being able to focus on something and then being able to refocus once your attention drifts is a super important skill for fighting. And it's actually a great thing to do when you have a concussion, since it's giving your brain time to relax and not be stimulated. And let's be honest, all of our attention spans need work, with things like TikTok deteriorating our brain. Also, you could still do film study, which is a very important thing for any sport that you do. Sometimes it's even more useful than actual training, because it shows you what you're supposed to be doing or what you're actually supposed to look like when you're fighting. And last thing is stretching. Yeah, maybe you can't do hard, complicated yoga poses, but you could still work on your mobility and flexibility. Now I'm gonna get into if you're training normally with an injury. For example, when I slightly tweaked my shoulder, it was hurt, but it wasn't hurt bad enough to where I had to modify my training. But there were still two things that I did. The first thing was to just warm up extra good. There's a channel called HybridCalisthenics who explained it perfectly. And they said your muscles are like cheese, because when cheese is cold, it breaks really easily. But when it's warm, you could stretch it and it's a lot more mendable. So just make sure your cheese is nice and warm. But yeah, it's just extra important to get your blood flowing and your muscles nice and loose when you're hurt. There's been tons of times where I've been so sore I could barely even move, but when I go to the gym and warm up, I feel fine. I'm gonna link the video where Hybrid Calisthenics explained it in the description below, by the way. But the next thing is just a good rule of thumb to follow when you're training with an injury. Let's say you tweak your hip. If you throw a kick with a tweaked hip, obviously it's gonna feel a little bit uncomfortable. But after you throw a kick or later in the day, if your hip is still around the same amount of pain, it's up to you whether you want to keep training with it or not. But personally, I think it would be fine. But let's say you throw a kick with your tweaked hip and it hurts a noticeable amount more. That's when I'd say to cut it and modify your training. And as much as injuries suck, there are some pros to them. Eddie Abasolo, one of the best Muay Thai fighters in the world, explained that when you tweak something, it's usually because you're using it too much. For example, when I tweaked my shoulder, it was because I was using my jab and my lead arm just way too much. So it forced me to work on my other weapons like my right hand and my kicks and my clinch game also. Also, injuries just expose your weaknesses. Like when I talked about how I fractured my foot twice, both of those times were preventable if I just aimed at my kicks better. So it forced me to work on my kicking accuracy and just placing my shots better. Or let's say if you're always tweaking your ankle, it's usually a sign you need to do some ankle strengthening exercises or some mobility work. But yeah, injuries suck ass. I've dealt with injuries a lot, not just in martial arts, but when I was playing football also. And from my experience, the physical side of an injury is one thing, but the mental side is just a whole other battle in itself, which I can make a video about sometime and just talk about ways to deal with it. But just to recap everything I talked about in this video, when something is injured, make sure you train the areas that don't hurt. Then you could modify your training in certain ways like I talked about. Then if you have a small tweak, just make sure to warm up extra good and follow the rule of thumb that I talked about. Then when you get an injury, just understand it's a sign that you need to change something. Whether you're using a certain weapon too much, or you need strength or mobility in a certain area, or you're doing something that's technically wrong or strategically wrong. But if you have any questions you think I could help with, just ask me in the comment section below. Always feel free to ask questions, it actually helps me too, because it makes me understand what people want to know, which helps me put out better content. Also, if you found this video helpful, leave a like if you can. It helps my channel out a lot. And if you're new here, my goal is to help athletes and martial artists out with their goals, so subscribe if you think this channel could help you. Also, here's another video you might find helpful. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.